The valley below the limestone canopy did not wake with a shout. It woke with a slow exhaling of steam. Long before the sun cleared the jagged spine of the eastern volcano, before the sulfur-tinged winds began to rustle the massive fronds of the tree ferns, a small hand reached out from a nest of dried grass and palm leaves. It brushed away a stray droplet of moisture that had condensed on the cave wall. The hand was slender, the fingers slightly curved. It was built not for the delicate threading of needles, but for the heavy, rhythmic strain of wrapping around rough-hewn branches and gripping slick rock faces. It belonged to an adult female, standing just over 3 feet tall. Her name is lost to the mud of the cave floor, but her world was brilliantly, vividly alive. To call her a hobbit is to invite a fairy tale. To look at her through the cold lens of taxonomy as Homo Floresiensis is to measure her in dry bone and Latin. But step into her shoes, or rather her calloused, widespread bare feet, and you find a daily life of dizzying triumph, fierce familial warmth, and a quiet, daily defiance against an island that was at once a paradise and a crucible. This is the story of how they lived. Part 1. The architecture of an island life. Imagine an Earth where the map is slightly smeared. Sea levels are lower, leaving broad, sun-baked plains of exposed continental shelf, but the deep oceanic trenches remain unbridged. Flores was an island then, as it is now, isolated by miles of churning, unpredictable straits filled with saltwater crocodiles and fast currents. For most animals, reaching Flores meant swimming a gauntlet or drifting on a random raft of uprooted trees during a typhoon. When ancestral hominins, likely a branch of Homo erectus, first washed up on these shores around 1 million years ago, they did not find an empty canvas. They found a laboratory of evolution. On islands, big animals shrink and small animals grow. It is a strange rule of ecological geometry known as the island rule. With limited resources and no vast continental ranges to roam, large mammals like elephants evolved down to the size of ponies, while rodents ballooned into creatures the size of small dogs. And the humans shrank too. Over hundreds of thousands of generations, standing tall became a liability. Height required more calories, more water, and more food in a landscape where game was bounded by the island's shores. Selection favored the compact. Inch by inch, generation by generation, the lineage folded inward. Their leg bones shortened. Their hips widened into a sturdy, flared build, and their brains settled into a compact, efficient volume, roughly the size of a chimpanzee's. Yet to look into the eyes of Homo floresiensis was to see something entirely apart from an ape. Their brows were prominent, shielding deep-set eyes that tracked the movement of a high-altitude hawk with sharp calculation. Their shoulders were slung slightly forward, built for climbing the vertical limestone cliffs that walled in their valleys. They were not broken giants. They were masterpieces of miniaturization. Part 2. The Hearth and the Hive. Inside the cool, echoing expanse of Leang Cave, morning was a sensory symphony. The scent of wood smoke mingled with the damp, mineral tang of wet earth. Fire was their anchor. They did not merely keep embers alive. They built and tended hearths that served as the beating heart of the community, pushing back the damp chill of the tropical night. Whether they could strike fresh fire or carefully nursed existing embers is uncertain, but what is clear is that fire was central to their lives. Family here was not a nuclear unit tucked behind a locked door. It was a collective web of survival. Because infant mortality loomed and childbirth for a small-bodied mother was perilous, raising the young was a communal affair. An elderly female, one of the rare few who had survived past her 30s, sat near the back of the cave. Her molars were heavily worn, and her forearm bore a fracture that had healed long ago. In her lap she held a toddler, gently rubbing a salve made from crushed aromatic leaves onto a bug bite on the child's knee. Around them, others huddled close, sharing body heat against the pre-dawn damp. Language among them was likely a rich tapestry of rhythmic clicks, low murmurs, expressive faces, and hand gestures. They did not need grand abstract philosophy to bond. They shared the immediate, pressing grammar of existence. Look, a shadow on the ridge. Share the yam. Guard the ember. When someone was sick or injured, they were not abandoned. They were fed, protected, and kept warm by the group. We know this because the fossil record preserves an individual with a severe injury that had healed long before death, tended long enough to mend. Compassion was as old as humanity, and these small people carried it in their bones. Part 3. The daily hunt and the pantry of the jungle. As the morning mist burned off, turning the jungle canopy into a shimmering emerald dome, the foraging parties formed. Their diet was a masterclass in opportunistic resourcefulness. They did not have the sweeping bows and arrows of later peoples, nor the massive throwing spears of open savannas. Instead, they were masters of the vertical forest and the subterranean earth. Before stepping into the brush, a young male crouched by a stone anvil. In his hands he held a core of local chert, a fine-grained, glassy volcanic rock. With a precise, practiced strike from a hammerstone, he sheared off a razor-sharp flake. He tested the edge with his thumb, grunted in satisfaction, and wedged the flake into a split bamboo handle, securing it with tough plant fibers. Their toolkit was simple, elegant, and devastatingly effective. Small handheld stone flakes could skin an animal or carve wood with surgical precision. Perforators and awls pierced hides, stripped bark, and fashioned simple containers. And fire-hardened wooden spears, long poles sharpened at the tip and baked in the embers, hardened the wood for close-range thrusting. What did they hunt? On Flores, the menu was bizarre. First, the Stegodon, the pocket elephant. Not the massive, woolly mammoths of the north, but a dwarfed cousin of the ancient elephant, standing roughly the size of a modern cow or large pony. Hunting a Stegodon was high-stakes, communal work. A single young or injured animal could feed the clan for weeks, but it was dangerous. The hunters would track a calf or a lone adult near a muddy watering hole or a steep ravine, and using coordination, blazing torches, and sharp wooden spears, they would drive the beast into a trap, using the terrain to overcome their lack of size. Second, the giant rats. On an island free of many traditional mammalian carnivores, rodents evolved to fill the niche of small to medium game. The giant rats of Flores were hefty, some weighing several pounds, akin to a small dog. They were slow, plump, and rich in fat and protein. Catching them required patience, snares woven from vines, and quick reflexes in the dense undergrowth. Third, monitor lizards and the Komodo dragon. These apex reptiles shared the island. A full-grown Komodo dragon was a terrifying predator to be avoided, but smaller monitor lizards were hunted for meat and tough skin. And fourth, the plant kingdom. Meat was a luxury. Plants were the bedrock. Women and children scoured the forest floor for wild yams, nutrient-rich tubers, sweet forest fruits, crisp palm hearts, and fungi. They knew every poisonous root by sight and every medicinal leaf that could soothe a stomachache or staunch bleeding. Part 4. Weather, climate, and the dance of the monsoons. Life on Flores was dictated by the sky. There were no gentle four seasons here. There was the wet monsoon and the dry monsoon. When the wet season arrived, it came with biblical fury. For months, the sky turned a bruised purple-gray, and sheets of warm rain lashed the jungle. Rivers swelled into brown, roaring monsters that ripped trees from their banks and swallowed trails overnight. During these months, the cave became a fortress. Movement outside was limited to short, daring dashes to gather firewood or check nearby traps. The air inside smelled of wet earth, roasted tubers, and human skin. It was a time of storytelling, not with words on parchment, but through gestures, rhythmic humming, and teaching the children to craft tools by the flickering light of the hearth. The fire was everything. If the hearth went out during a prolonged storm, the cold and damp could spell sickness. Then the clouds would part. The dry season would sweep in, painting the landscape in sun-bleached gold and dust. The streams would shrink to trickles, and the search for water became the primary quest. They knew the secret locations of hidden underground springs, deep beneath limestone roots, where cool, sweet water pooled year-round. They moved with the rhythm of the water, a quiet dance of survival choreographed by the island itself. Part 5. Shadows on the Ridge. They were not the only minds on the island, nor the only creatures capable of fear and wonder. Sometimes, standing on a high limestone ridge at dusk and looking out over the canopy toward the distant sea, a watcher would freeze. Below, in the shadows of the valley, the rustle of brush was too heavy for a deer, too deliberate for a wild boar. They shared their world with dangers that kept them humble. The giant storks of Flores, relatives of the African marabou, and standing over 6 feet tall with massive, dagger-like beaks, stalked the wetlands and could easily snatch an unattended toddler. The Komodo dragon, the largest lizard on Earth, prowled the margins. Crocodiles waded in the rivers, and far across the sea, beyond the horizon where water met sky, other humans were moving. Taller humans. Humans with long legs and complex weapons, who had crossed the straits on bamboo rafts from the north. Did the small people ever look out at the ocean and wonder what lay beyond? Did they pass down legends of strangers across the water? We know from the fossil record that Homo Floresiensis held their ground on Flores for hundreds of thousands of years, surviving volcanic eruptions that choked the sky with ash, earthquakes that split the hills, and climate shifts that turned forests into grasslands. They were a testament to the staggering resilience of life. They did not need to conquer the world to matter. They had mastered their own corner of it. Part 6. Twilight and Echoes. The story of Homo Floresiensis does not end with a dramatic battle or a sudden catastrophe, but with a long, quiet fading. Roughly 50,000 years ago, the volcanic activity on the island intensified. Massive eruptions rained ash across the valleys, choking the plants, driving away the game, and fracturing the delicate balance of the island ecosystem. At the same time, modern humans, Homo sapiens, expanding through Southeast Asia, brought new pressures, competition for resources, and perhaps disease. One by one, the hearths in Leang went cold. The small hands stopped shaping stone flakes. The laughter around the fire faded into the damp silence of the cave. Yet they did not vanish entirely. When you walk through the green valleys of Flores today, past the terraced rice paddies and the towering bamboo groves, listen closely to the local folklore. The elders of the region have long spoken of the Ebu Gogo, a race of small, hairy, cave-dwelling creatures who spoke in murmuring whispers, walked with a rolling gait, and could eat almost anything. The villagers described them as standing knee-high to a man, mischievous, wild, and deeply human in their habits. For generations, outsiders dismissed the Ebu Gogo as a fairy tale told to frighten children. But science caught up with the myth. When archaeologists first unearthed the tiny bones of Homo Floresiensis in 2003, they realized that the fairy tale was actually a faded memory, a ghost story passed down across tens of thousands of years, whispered around modern fires about the small, fierce, wonderful people who were here first. They were small in stature, but they walked tall in the history of existence. They loved. They huddled against the cold. They hunted the elephant and tamed the fire. And they proved that the human spirit is not measured in inches, but in the unyielding will to live.